My name is Andrea DeHaan. I'm the outreach coordinator for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I'm excited to be taking our programming online today and thrilled to be kicking things off with two local CHAS alumni, Kerry Bringhurst and Tom Williams of Utah Public Radio. And I will say that this is our first digital takeout. So we hope that you listening will bear with any technical difficulties we experience today. And I know that Tom Williams has been busy working to interview some folks for his UPR duties, and so is in the process of joining us. So if I sound a bit disjointed, it's because I'm taking care of some tech things in the background. But I do just want to tell you a little bit about Kerry and Tom's background before we get started with some questions for them. So Kerry began her work as a reporter for KVEL, known as the Hot One in Vernal, Utah. Her radio news interests led her to Logan, where she became news director for KBLQ while attending Utah State University. She graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism and spent the next few years working for Utah Public Radio. Leaving UPR in 1993, she spent 14 years as the full-time mother of 4 boys before returning to the station in 2007. Kerry is the host of Morning Edition on UPR and co-manages the station along with our other guest, Tom Williams. Tom started out as a part-time UPR announcer for a few years before joining Utah Public Radio full-time in 1996. He is a proud graduate of Uinta High School in Vernal and Utah State University, having earned a BA in liberal arts and a Master of Business Administration. Tom grew up in a family that regularly discussed everything from opera to religion to politics, and he loves to engage people in conversation. Thus, you could say he has found the perfect job as host of Access Utah. Welcome, Kerry and Tom. And I know that Tom, again, is in the process of joining us right now, so I'm going to help him out with that in just a second. But before I do, I'm going to start you off, Kerry, with the first question. And let me start by asking you, and then as Tom joins us, he can chime in. We can repeat the question for him. But let me start by asking you to remind us how you came to your current occupation, Kerry, and how you chose this career path, and what it is you like about your current job.
One of the things that stood out for COVID-19 that was amazing about my job is I could go to work in my pajamas and nobody would know. But now everybody can do that. So I guess that's not such a big thing, right? Because we're all working from home and who knows what we're wearing. But yeah, I came about broadcasting in kind of an unusual way. Our local commercial station where I grew up in Vernal wanted to have a reporter that would represent kind of student life, what was happening in the community. And I was given that opportunity and started that when I was the summer before my freshman year in high school, and continued to do that until I graduated, and developed a love for writing news and being involved in state government. I would attend the different political meetings and report on that. So basically I would rush to the station after my high school classes and attend different meetings, and had a great news director that taught me the importance of being able to discern what information was useful, how to keep track of facts and information, and basically be a distributor of information. I mean, that's what we do as journalists. We aren't the experts by any means, but we're kind of a means to sharing information from experts and those who are in a position to help us make decisions about everyday life. And it just continued to be a passion. I had spent several years doing commercial radio and wasn't introduced to public radio until probably my senior year at Utah State University as a journalism student, and have really appreciated the opportunity to expand my journalism and my writing in a way that I think allows for more in-depth reporting, also more storytelling attributes, more of the human interest element to not only human interest stories, but also the human element into stories important like COVID-19. Not just what government officials are saying, not just what health experts are saying, but what are individuals in our communities saying, and what can we learn from them? So public radio has really provided that outlet for me. I also enjoy the creative process of sound design, sound engineering, and the technical aspects of operating sound equipment and board operations when I host my program. There's a lot of creative opportunity and outlet there. But I think most important is just the ability to share factual information that, again, can help people become better educated and make better decisions.
Excellent. Thank you, Kerry. And Tom, I'm going to attempt to unmute you now to see, again, I apologize, folks, we're having some difficulty bringing him in. You might not be able to see Tom, but Tom, I've just attempted to unmute you. Are we able to hear you? Okay, so unfortunately that has not worked. I don't hear Tom. We are going to continue to try to bring Tom Williams into the conversation. But Kerry, perhaps what we'll do is we will give you the next question from Joe, and then we'll continue to try to bring Tom in with us. So Joe, if you want to take Kerry and continue the conversation, I'll continue to work in the background, and we'll hopefully get Tom Williams to join us shortly.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so thanks, Kerry. So the question that I wanted to ask is, how has media coverage and like the day-to-day appearance of your job, how's that changed now in the wake of COVID-19?
Well, when we first received word that there were concerns about a virus that was having dramatic impact on communities in China, and there was potential for that to, evolve here in the United States, we doubled up our reporting and our coverage and thought, this will be it. This is what we're doing. We're increasing our reporting. We're keeping up to date on what is happening. And it was amazing how quickly we went from just ramping up our news coverage to needing to find ways that we could provide that up-to-date information outside of our typical studio environment. How could we get our reporters the equipment that they needed so that they could continue to interview, like we said, those individuals being impacted directly? And so we went from being able to operate under standard conditions to having our news director. I haven't seen her for almost a month now. We communicate every day. So just like many of you, trying to make those adjustments to be able to work from home and still do our jobs. Of course, being able to get accurate information is an essential part of what we do. And we take it very seriously, the need for us to be able to access those experts and individuals who can share information so that we can then distribute that to you. So making sure that we had everything in line to where our reporters had what they needed. We had one reporter that had taken a trip international and was required to stay home for 14 days. And so she's been reporting from her home. All of our reporters are reporting from their homes right now. And everything is being done through telephone. I think one of the most interesting aspects of all of this, not just here locally, but nationally, has been a change in attitude as far as the quality of interviews. We've always taken very seriously trying to get the best sound quality, right, for our interviews, and trying to avoid those telephone interviews if at all possible, because the quality was just not there and it didn't sound like you were in person and it didn't sound personable. And now having telephone interviews is very par for the course. I mean, it's just been accepted that that's how things are going. So it's kind of been an old school way of doing journalism again, like we used to do when I first started, doing a lot of things over the telephone, not being able to make it to any scene of action or activity. So that's been a little fun to kind of trace back to those ways of doing things in the past. So that was one change, just making sure all of our reporters had everything they needed so they could report from home. Also, what happens if we get to the point where I can't or Tom can't go to the station? We try and only have one person at the station at a time. And what if we can't go there to do our live programs? We still have to produce everything in a studio. We don't have setups at our home where we can have a soundboard that will connect directly to the station and then broadcast throughout the state through our 5 transmitters and our 33 translators. So how would we do that? And we have made arrangements to where we pre-recorded a lot of information so that if we do end up needing to go automated, which means that everything would operate on its own at our Logan facility, we could do that. And all of our local content would then be accessible on our website. But we have recorded things in advance to where Tom can just input that playlist from his home and we can automate so that you do not have to work from the station. We hope that doesn't happen. There are a lot of things that can technically go wrong when you try and rely on those systems, especially where we've never had a need or an opportunity to utilize it 24/7. So that was another change that has come into play. For me personally, just trying to adjust to working at the station and then coming home and working at my home studio and not being able to do both. It takes almost 3 times as much effort to get our content out there as it did before. But amazingly so, we have met the demand and I think exceeded what we thought we were able to do, and providing much more information with this focused effort to try and keep people informed and to be safe.
Right. So, Kerry, I have another question for you. And just by way of an update, Tom was, as I said, in an interview right before this program and was at the station and was having difficulty getting the software on his station computer to be compatible with our system here. So he is actually so committed. He's in the process of driving home to try to use his home computer. So again, we're going to try to bring in Tom Williams as soon as we can. We're sorry, Kerry, that you're flying solo. But as someone who works in radio, you know about these moments and know that they happen and you just have to keep going. So the next question.
I think that demonstrates exactly, Andrea, what I was trying to say. We don't now have everything we had at the station. Part of that's at home now. So, making that transition because his computer's at home and yeah, unexpected things happen. So we're good. It's all good.
Very much so. Well, thank you for being patient with us. Moving with that same sort of topic of COVID-19 and how it has changed things, would you say that the current epidemic has changed your industry? And do you see these changes as temporary, or do you see some of them as permanent changes?
That's an excellent question. And I think in the public radio world, one of the largest impacts has been our not inability, but our creative way of trying to sustain our giving levels, because we are a nonprofit and at least 1/3, if not more, of the support for public radio stations comes from donations from our listeners. Now, of course, our listenership is up. We are seeing more and more people turning to public radio, and that's true for Utah Public Radio. And the appreciation for the services that we provide has increased. So how do we go about maintaining those services when we can't and don't feel that it's appropriate to now go to people as we normally would and say, hey, we need your money. We don't want to interrupt programming. We would normally take a week and really just interrupt our regular programming. And we can't do that. That would be irresponsible. And we have a responsibility to serve our listeners. So I think for all public radio stations, trying to figure out how to acquire the financial support that we need to continue has been an adjustment. And in our case, Katie Swain, who is our membership director, has done a lot of research and has connected with other public radio stations. We belong to a network of public radio stations through an organization called Greater Public, where we can share ideas and information. And I think that has brought us closer together as an industry, trying to determine how we can best serve our communities while reminding them that the service is made possible through their donations. And Katie has done a really good job of making that happen. We've revised things a little bit, so we've had to be creative. And I'm happy to say we're at 65% of our spring goal. And to me, that's just amazing. And I think for most public radio stations, they're seeing success, and it's helped to actually reinforce and build our relationships with those who have been longtime members who may have just had a relationship with their public radio station through listening, are now being given the opportunity to be more engaged because we are taking the time to reach out above and beyond just our programming, to take extra effort to make sure we connect with our members. We know they're home, they're isolated, they need some reassurance that things, like you said, Andrea, will come back to seeing some normalcy. And I think in the industry, we will see that. I do think that, as I mentioned earlier, we are realizing that our capability of providing information in ways that we hadn't thought about for years still works. And maybe we'll take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, we can still provide news and information in a way that has an impact, but maybe looking at things differently, maybe looking at how things are impacting our smaller communities, our rural communities, because we're spending more time doing that and not just focusing on the urban, larger communities where there maybe are more resources for healthcare, more resources for online education through the internet, whereas some of the rural communities, that's not the case. So we're rethinking maybe whose stories we're telling and how something like a pandemic can impact us. So those are some things. I'm also reading a lot of information about what it's going to mean as far as federal funding for public radio stations, how that might change. There's always, every year as they review the budget, some concern as to whether the Corporation for Public Broadcasting will receive funding through the federal coffers. Conversation I received an email today from Mitt Romney. I had reached out to him just to say, where's the federal government when it comes to additional funding for our public broadcasters that are really on the front lines of making this information available. And it seems like maybe Congress is opening up a little bit to the realization that news media is important. Factual news sources are important, not just Facebook, not just Twitter, but factual news organizations that we have come to depend on need that continued support as we are seeing advertising rates plummet because small businesses are struggling, and that's a source of advertising for local media. We're seeing all sorts of different facets of funding depleted. We're seeing local newspapers and news sources going out of business completely. So I think this is giving us an opportunity to remind the public of how important local content and news and information is. Really, we can't just depend on what's happening nationally. We need to find out how things are impacting individuals and communities. Every day, we're giving updates on what is happening in each health district throughout the state of Utah. Those big state numbers are great, but who's going to report on those numbers and those figures and those impacts in those local communities? It's your local news source. So I think we'll see a resurgence of some of thinking of the importance of local content and local news organizations. So I'm looking forward to that.
Right. Nice, thanks. I just want to remind or notify any of our viewers out there, if they wanted to ask any questions, feel free to put any of your questions up in the question and answer section, and then we'll address those after these initial questions here. And so, Kerry, I know that a lot of times when we're in the moment here, that a lot of times we'll draw back on past experiences and notice how those past experiences kind of prepared us for any emergencies or any things that we're doing right now. So just wanted to ask you, were there any previous experiences that you had that in either your job or in the industry that prepared you to deal with this crisis right now?
Yes, I've been thinking a lot about the floods of 1983. I'm sure many of you weren't even born at that time, but for me, as a young journalist, again in high school, severe flooding throughout the state of Utah. And that was the case in Vernal as well. And I remember being asked by our news director to um, try and get some coverage, some live coverage of what was happening in the areas where we had a bridge that had actually been destroyed because the river was flowing at such high rates that I remember going down toward the river and trying to get that sound, because that's what we do as radio journalists, is we try to capture sound to help create a scene, to help create an environment. And I remember specifically, standing near that river and having the sound of the roaring river, just as a news network helicopter was flying over scene. So I think that, for me, is the thing I miss the most about what is happening to us right now, is the inability to really go out there and capture sound. This is a silent pandemic. We talk to a lot of government officials. We hear a lot from those who are being impacted, whether it be through organizations that are trying to support through human services or other programs. Really not hearing a lot of sound. And it's a lot of voices, and that's good too. But one of the aspects of radio that I enjoy most is being able to capture something other than the voice, to help create an image, to help tell that story of what's happening. And so those images and those sounds of the flooding, and how we don't really have any of that to pull on, to rely on for this way of telling stories, has changed the listening experience, in my opinion. We are again hearing a lot of telephone interviews, and it is just how it has to be right now. We have to be safe. We have an obligation to our reporters to keep them safe. We have an obligation to the community to not be in their face, so to speak. And so we're feeling the social distancing aspects in our production quality as well. And I can always tell stories about Tom if we ever, I did grow up in the same community as him, which isn't that interesting that two of us from Uintah Basin would end up managing the public radio station in Logan. I will tell you the first memory I have of Tom, because he's a lot older than me, was when I was probably in middle school, and my dad taught at the same high school that he attended. And I remember my dad needing to go talk to somebody, and I went with him because I'd gone after school for him to take me home. And it just so happened that the student radio station was in that same building. And I remember looking over and seeing this long-haired hippie guy hosting a radio show on the high school radio program, and it was Tom Williams. So he has a little bit of radio history too, his being high school radio. So that's one of my earlier memories of Tom. Of course, the hair's gone, and we won't get into that. If we get the video of him, you'll see that the long-haired hippie is no longer. But Tom's job has changed a lot because of what is happening. He does his daily call-in program, and again, a lot of times we would have individuals in the station to help us produce that program. Now everything's on phone, which makes it a lot more complicated to try and manage those phone lines. And so that has been a change for him. And the information and the resources that we need to share with people when it comes to what is being done to help small businesses acquire loans and federal help, and those guidelines are changing on a regular basis. So our connection with chambers of commerce and other organizations that are trying to help small businesses better understand how they can access federal help. Tom's keeping contact with them on a daily basis to see if there's more information that we need to share to help small business owners, those who are unemployed, those who are seeing changes in the FMLA guidelines. So all of these federal guidelines are changing on a regular basis, and that's one of the things things he's taken on as our Access Utah host is keeping people up to date and being able to call in with their questions and information. This morning, our program focused on what's happening with arts communities and what help is out there for them. As they're trying to decide whether to continue their seasons or to cancel their season, how's that going to impact their bottom line? And so, we are hearing those personal stories during his program. That's been really effective to allow people to call in and share their insights and what they're going through, whether it be the arts or a small business organization. And tomorrow, a lot of conversation about how it's impacting institutions of higher education as we help cover the town hall meeting that USU President Noel Cockett will be presenting tomorrow. People can log onto our website and listen to that and ask questions of them. And so, anything we can do to connect with people and have them be able to access information and share information that is critical to them right now. What's critical to them right now is very different than what was important and critical to them even a month ago. And so how we allow for those conversations to happen has changed, and Access Utah has probably been one of the most important programs, is being able to have that community connection and contact every day at 9 o'clock where people can call in and share what it is they need for us to provide for them. Let me just take an opportunity, Andrea. I know that you have access to our website. This might be a good opportunity to talk about some of the programs that might be helpful as you're trying to deal with some of the components of COVID-19. We started a program in the fall entitled Project Resilience, and this started out with Vonda Jump, who is in the sociology program at Utah State University, one of the professors there. This started out as a way to share stories and help provide resources who maybe have dealt with traumatic events in their lives, and what tips are there out there that can help individuals become more resilient. And we started out with providing tips for parents on how to help children who are maybe struggling with their schoolwork or maybe throwing temper tantrums. And boy, has Project Resilience taken on a completely different role during this COVID-19. As we are trying to provide individuals with tips on how to deal with anxiety or what they can do to release some stress, how they can address social isolation in their own circumstances. So we've been providing tips on our our on-air broadcast through Utah Public Radio, but also online here at upr.org. And Tom, again, has had several programs allowing experts to talk about, how we process what's happening in our mind and how that's impacting our emotional health and our physical health. So these are some great tips. And you're seeing a lot of these types of resources being made available. This is our way to help individuals maybe deal with some of the components of COVID-19 emotionally as well as physically, and provide some great tips from experts here at Utah State University. Again, they're the experts, we're just the distributor of information. So there's the Project Resilience that has been very helpful. We also started another program with USU Extension and Sandra Salzer and her group, an initiative they have to address opioid addiction in rural and tribal communities. So this started out as a podcast called Debunked, where the host, Tim Rice, was basically taking a myth associated with opioid use in our rural communities and debunking those myths. And as the COVID-19 component pulled into that, he has done a great job, and our producers at UPR also doing a great job to maybe debunking some of the myths associated with COVID-19. And that's a podcast that can be heard through however you obtain your podcast, but also here at upr.org. And then we've taken some of those components and made them available through our Access Utah program, where Tom has brought in some of the guests. We talk about rural and tribal communities and some of the issues that they're facing. The Navajo population has some of the highest rates per capita, being hit hard when it comes to this COVID-19. 11 cases so far in San Juan County of deaths associated to COVID-19 in the Navajo tribe communities. So Debunked is another resource for addressing COVID-19, but also other issues. Just because COVID-19 is happening doesn't mean that opioid use is down, that we don't need to be talking about how we might intervene or help support those who are maybe used to being able to work with group therapy sessions to address their opioid use or other addictions, where right now that is not possible. And in rural communities, not everybody has access to the internet. So this is a big concern that's happening right now in our different communities. Oh, it looks like Tom's here. Hi, Tom.
I was going to say, Tom is in the process of joining us. I know he can hear us, so I'm going to attempt to bring him in. And while I do that, Kerry, perhaps you can start to answer this question, and then hopefully I'll be able to give Tom full access to video and audio. But the question I have now is to ask, we've been talking about COVID-19, we've been talking about its impact on your industry as a journalist and working in media and in public radio. But how would you take what you've learned from this, and also what you've learned from your many, many years of experience working in public radio, to tell us, what advice would you have for graduating seniors or job seekers who are entering what is admittedly a bit of an uncertain market right now? But in terms of, you talked about your project resilience. If we borrow from that term, how can job seekers right now be resilient as they enter the job market? And what advice would you have specifically for students interested in pursuing a career in broadcast journalism?
Right. So uncertain times, definitely, but I think now more than ever, there is a realization of the importance of those who have skills and the knowledge needed to share information, to bring together different sources of information, to tell not only compelling but factual and informative stories that have a direct impact. That's needed now more than ever. So if you have those skills and you have a desire to be able to utilize your skills, I know in our case, and as I followed other public radio stations, other public media resources, email is great. Let them know you have those skills. There are federal grants and grants from Facebook and other organizations that are being set up to help with news agencies and news organizations during this time, because they realize the importance. So some stations are actually benefiting and having more of an income base to hire. Maybe it's just part-time, maybe it's freelance reporters, but there are jobs out there if you're skilled in social media and you're able to make those connections. Reach out to different news organizations in your communities. Let them know you have those skills. I would love to connect with individuals in the Uinta Basin. For any of you who are maybe in a situation where you're attending a statewide campus in any of those campus areas here in the state of Utah through Utah State University, really appreciate being able to hire somebody maybe on a freelance part-time basis that could gather and share information with us so that we can, again, tell the stories of what's happening throughout the state of Utah. And I know that's the case throughout the nation. So wherever you are, this is a really good time to hit up your news organizations and share and demonstrate your skills and your abilities. With a simple purchase of some recording equipment, you can set up to where you can record on your phone. You can do audio editing directly through different programs. I know Audacity is one that's used. It's a little clunky, but it can work. If you are affiliated with Utah State University, it's my understanding that you could access the Adobe Audition software and utilize that. It's very similar to Audacity, or if you've done any kind of software editing, easily learn how to manipulate that software and do your own audio editing. I know that we have the ability to provide some online training to help you with that, and I know that would be the case for other stations. But reach out to your local newspapers, your local radio stations, your providers of news and information, and let them know you have those skills, and be sure and have something where you can demonstrate that. But a lot of times, and this is true even from the national level, if you talk to some of the reporters that are now big within National Public Radio, they will tell you it is a disaster in a situation like this that has made their career. And it's not because they were known reporters and the broadcasters contacted them. No, they contacted the news organizations and the agencies and just went about gathering content and sharing that content with those distributors. I know that was the case for Howard Burkus. I know that was the case for Corey Flintoff. His big thing was the Exxon oil spill in Alaska, and that took him to Russia to become the news bureau chief in that part of the world. Corey Flintoff, or I'm sorry, Howard Burkus, his began, I believe, and Tom, if you can hear me, you can correct me. I believe that was the Mount Rainier, or the, one of the volcano eruptions in the state of Washington that has left me. But they were there. We can't get there. If you can get somewhere and get a story, do it and share it with your local news organizations and give them an example of what you can do. I think this is a perfect opportunity to do that. So I would feel hopeful right now. Be creative, think outside the box. Consider what you can do to prove to somebody in a position to hire you. Prove to them what you can do. Take some initiative. Contribute stories. Give them a call, because they're at their desks where they typically aren't most times. They're usually out and about, but no, we're here now. So contact with us, make that contact. Let us know that you have those skills. So that would be my advice at this time. Looks like we might still be having problems getting Tom.
I would say, Tom, are you able to hear us, and can we test your mic? Yeah, unfortunately, we're still not hearing Tom. We can see him, so we're 50% there. We'll continue to work on that, Tom. If you're able to get that working, feel free to chime in as you like. Kerry's been doing a great job of flying solo, but we really appreciate you, Tom, driving home and trying to work with the technology with us. I think that's great advice, Kerry, that you're giving to students, to just encourage them to seize the opportunity to prove that they have an interest and that they have things, especially in this day and age, right at their fingertips, that they can use to try to use some of that technology to their advantage, to practice and to gain some practical experience as they look to enter the job market.
I do have a couple of other suggestions that might be useful. Report for America is a program that's available to up-and-coming journalists. This is a national program. And if you go to Facebook, if you'll just Google Facebook and journalism initiatives, I think you might be able to get access to that information. Once a year, they accept applications for reporters who are interested in maybe doing a one-year stint that could actually evolve into something else. It's a partnership between local media organizations, where the media organization will pay 50% of the salary for the year, and then Report for America will pay the other half of the salary. It's a great program. I know a number of our interns have applied for that, and a couple have had that opportunity. So that would be another resource for you to look into. I think the applications are, again, once a year, and I don't think they come up again until next January. But the Facebook Journalism Project also, they're doing new things because of what's happening. So, maybe keep that in your toolbox, something to check on a fairly regular basis. I know another thing that's been helpful, if you're in a position to do some type of volunteer work, internship work, if you really can develop those skills and you are reputable in your skill set. Stations will go to bat for you and helping you get internships with organizations like NPR. We've had that happen. Bennett Purser has interned with NPR and also with Marketplace. And right now he's working for Marketplace. And every once in a while, we'll hear his name in the credits. That's kind of fun. And that starts again from the ground up. You got to solidify those relationships. So don't be afraid. I've brought in interns that have walked in the door and just said, I want to do this. That to me is one of the most important skills, is a desire and being open to some training. And I would also say that depending on where you want to head with your skills, take some time and really research that organization, get to know what their audience is and what their needs are, because that's different for each organization. That's one thing as we're training our students through our internship program. We always try to encourage them to do some research. We work with them on better understanding who it is that we serve, because we do serve different outlets out there as far as listeners. Public radio listeners are different than commercial radio listeners. So how you present your news and information is going to be different if you want to work for a commercial radio station versus a public radio station versus an online-only news source versus television. It's all going to be different. So know your audience. Get to know who it is you want to work for and how your skill set fits into what they're doing. So that would be another showing of advice that I would give.
Okay. And again, thank you, Kerry, for giving us information about this. And again, we really do apologize to Tom. He is trying everything. Tom, if you want to just try giving us a shout one more time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Wonderful.
I called in, so I guess maybe I should have tried that earlier.
Well, we appreciate your patience with us, Tom. This is new technology for all of us, and we appreciate your patience and your perseverance in being willing to drive home and join us here at the end of the conversation. But we do still have some time, and before we go to the Q&A, since you are joining us, Tom, if I just give you a quick overview of some of the things Kerry has talked about, maybe you could give us your take on a few of those topics. So specifically, we asked her, I'm just going to review so that I've got it in front of me. We asked her to talk a little bit about how she chose her career path. We asked her to talk about how the media coverage has changed in the wake of COVID-19, as well as whether those changes have been permanent or temporary. And we also asked her to whether she felt prepared for those changes. So maybe you could start with those questions, sort of telling us, how has COVID-19 changed things for you? Did you feel prepared for any of those changes by any of your former experiences in radio? And how do you see those changes going forward?
Yeah, if you're in media long enough, you have big things come up. I remember 9/11, where it's the most recent example where that it was all 9/11 all the time, and life is disrupted. This is an even bigger example of life being disrupted, and having to do workarounds. But yeah, if you're in the media, you just get used to, when something hits, it's all hands on deck, and it's a lot of work, but it's exciting as well, because you're sort of on the front lines, getting information to people, trying to trying to help to connect people. That's what I love about media. You connect people, sort of gather people as a community as they tune in. So yeah, whatever you would like to name, the big stories, I think prepared us for this one. This one is different in the fact that, we're working from home as much as possible. And so there's a disruption. It's harder to gather audio, harder to process audio, harder hard just to do the fundamental parts of our jobs when you're not at the studio. So we've been trying to juggle that. But it's a good feeling knowing that you're connecting people and getting them information.
Well, thank you. And Tom, perhaps you could tell us, do you have advice for our graduating seniors from Utah State or other listeners who are seeking a job in media, in broadcast journalism, in radio right now? What advice would you give to them as they enter a somewhat uncertain future?
I would say if you have a passion for it, then go for it. Yeah, and my advice would be general advice in any major, right? Look for job experience. So internships are absolutely vital. We provide some of those at UPR. If you want to get into media, look up your local radio station or television station if you're in that area, and tell them you want to volunteer. Get your foot in the door that way. Organizations like Free Labor, we've had several people just walk in off the street here at UPR and say, "Hey, I want to volunteer," and sooner or later, as they've persevered, they've got a paid position, and have been some of our best people. The other thing I would suggest is find a mentor. Somebody in your field that maybe you respect and look up to. Just call them and say, "Hey, I'm a student, and I want to pick your brain and give me some advice. And can I get an hour of your time?" People are usually flattered by that. So find a mentor or two who can guide you and who can also help you network. Because that's the third piece of advice I would say is just pound the pavement. Work the phones. What is social media, whatever you do, and find one person to connect you with the next person with the next person. If you build a network, then I think you'll be able to get in. The hardest thing is getting in, right? So you'll be able to get in that way.
Excellent. And we've got just over 10 minutes left, so I'm going to turn things over to our events intern, London Maynard. And London is going to take some questions from our audience from the Q&A. Again, as my colleague Joe Banks mentioned earlier, if you've been listening to this conversation today and you have a question for Kerry or Tom that you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A box here on WebEx to ask us a question. And London's going to go through some of those right now.
Okay, hello everyone. One of the questions that we got in from our chat here is it says they are a big fan of UPR and they appreciate the Resilience series. Do you find that it was fortuitous that you were running this at the time of COVID-19?
I'll go ahead and start, Tom, unless you want to.
No, you go ahead.
It is interesting how that's all turned out. I think even before COVID-19, experts will tell you, and even family members, those in your social network will tell you that life can be stressful even before this. And so it was, our attempt to address those stresses. And interesting how the information has translated to what many of us are experiencing right now. I think what is of concern to me as a broadcaster and a provider of information is trying to guess what it is that people need and not being able really right now to have those interactions or to be out in the community and really observe. I spend a lot of what I do to do my job observing and listening to what's happening around me, and I don't have that opportunity right now. So my email box from so-called experts or those who want to try and push their agenda is full, and trying to discern what is actual and what is factual and what is really needed by our listeners to be resilient during this time has been a challenge, and really have appreciated the relationship we have with Bonded Jump, also Matthew Wackett with the Center for Persons with Disabilities, and those in the mind and body bridging through Utah State's CHAZ. Really nice that we've had that relationship with those experts for these months to come, because I think it's always helpful to know how to be resilient no matter what you're facing, but it's especially true right now. So it would have been helpful before COVID-19, was helpful before COVID-19, but will continue to be so. And again, we can't be out there observing or listening to what's going on in your lives. We still want to know what's going on in your lives. And so do email us, do whatever you can to reach out. And Tom, I'm sure you would agree that, Access Utah is one way of doing that, because we want to know what we can do to help.
Yeah, certainly true. That's the absolute best if people contact us, because then we know for sure what people want to hear. Otherwise, it's just networking. It's just, then sometimes it's gut feeling. If I'm feeling it, then I feel like a lot of our listeners are feeling it too, and then we'll do a program on it. But absolute best is if we get feedback.
Okay, so now one of our next questions, this is kind of a more general question about news. It says, it seems that the country is so divided on news sources. How do you filter your sources to make it unbiased?
Tom, why don't you start about how you Access Utah?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because as the country has become more and more polarized, at least the perception of the media has become polarized. And we writ large, the country, we tend to be comfortable in our silos, and so you can definitely choose your media sources and only hear what you want to hear. And I think more and more the country is doing that, unfortunately. I do think NPR tries really, really hard. There's a perception that it skews a bit liberal. I think that's not unwarranted. But I think the news department tries very, very hard to be unbiased, and I think people from all different political backgrounds flock to NPR for what they consider to be unbiased information. Certainly, UPR tries our best to do that. We try to get all sides and try to make sure that we're doing that, and that just takes vigilance. I think you just have to be vigilant about that.
Just add that one thing that I think this might be a great opportunity to kind of explain how public radio works, in that National Public Radio does not own or operate Utah Public Radio. It's the other way around. We purchase our content from National Public Radio, but also other organizations that are going out there and gathering information. We and Tom, your program director, and might have more information on this, but we also run programs from the BBC, which gives us a perspective of maybe how the rest of the world views what's happening in the United States. And you don't always have to agree with what you're hearing. In fact, I think maybe it's a good idea that you don't always agree. If you find yourself agreeing with everything, you might need to expand your source of where you're getting information, because it's good for all of us to maybe look at different perspectives and not expect the news media to solve all of our problems or answer all of our questions, but use it as a resource. It is a resource for information. And we can all benefit from looking at different perspectives and how people process. And we all make decisions based on different experiences. But our programming is not all NPR. It's Canadian programming. We bring in a lot from the Canadian Broadcast Service. There are other organizations, American Public Media, where we get the marketplace and business news. So Tom does a really good job of going out there and researching what programs are available that he thinks will benefit our listeners. And we do get complaints from our listeners, and there is a process that we go through. There have been times when I have felt that some of the programs during Morning Edition are maybe a little on the borderline, and there's an ombudsman that I will contact. And, you know, especially if we hear from listeners that have a concern, we share that with NPR. We don't have a lot of control over what they do during all of their programs, but I do know they listen. I have seen that happen. We have shared suggestions with them and concerns, and we've seen them take action. So there is a process. If we find that maybe given misinformation, you'll hear NPR do that. They'll come back and make a correction. We'll do that. None of this is perfect, but it is difficult as you're getting so much information thrown at you, and you do rely on your sources a lot of times. But we have to be aware, and we have to be listening. We have to be listening and open to, you know, what other conversations are happening out there.
Okay, so now I think we're going to have this one be the last question just for the sake of time. And one of our viewers says, do you have any advice for graduating students who are interested in complementing a different career with reporting or journalistic work? For example, pursuing science and science reporting or arts and arts reporting.
Ashley Rohde, did you ask that question? Ashley Rohde is one of our interns, and she's one of our science communicator interns. So she's a graduate student in ecology. And we have this wonderful partnership with USU's Ecology Center for Ecology. Oh, I can't remember the exact title now, but anyway, Ashley's part of that. She is a science communicator, and she and others in that program have taken their skills that they've learned at UPR and actually gone on to work for different organizations in the science communities. That's true for arts. That's true for government. Take those skills, and we all can learn how to be better communicators. And by gathering information and reviewing and summarizing through different press releases, hundreds of press releases, you learn to be able to pick out information and share that information in a way that the general population can understand how federal monies are being used for science research, why the arts communities are important, and why they choose to do what they do. So yes, I mean, you could use this skill set in all areas. Again, think outside the box, like we talked about earlier.
I would just add, yeah, absolutely, not only a good thing, but probably necessary in today's times. Whatever field you're in, you're going to need to be able to get the word out, and so those communication skills are vital.
All right. Well, definitely with closing up on that, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Tom, for doing this. And it's great that this is our first presentation here. And to be honest, I love it when the bumps go successful a lot more than everything just going smoothly. So thanks for your time, guys. And Andrea has just a few announcements really quick before we sign off.
I think, Andrea, you're on mute.
I've got to unmute myself. Thank you. Sorry, too many buttons at once. I miss having two screens. Like you said, the hardships of working from home. So I extend as well that thank you to Kerry and Tom and to our audience for joining us today. And I just want to take a moment to let you know that Kerry and Tom were kind enough to be our guinea pigs and to help us kick off this series in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences in partnership with Utah State Career Services. But we are going to continue this series. We're planning to continue it throughout the summer, and we have 2 additional events lined up in April that you should be able to see on your screens right now. Next week, join us for Sam Yagi. He is a history graduate of our program who now works for MarketStar in recruitment, and he's going to be talking about the current crisis's impact on employer recruitment. And you'll see we'll also be featuring another alum the following week who's going to talk about resiliency as a job seeker during a downturn. He graduated in 2008, 2009, and knows a little bit about that. So I would thank everyone who joined us today. Join us, next week when we do this again. And thanks for tuning in for this first one. And please come back and see us again. And thank you again, Kerry and Tom.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a great day.